Most of you probably know Ed Winters, also known as Earthling Ed. He has written several books. He has opened an animal sanctuary, a vegan restaurant, and we're so happy to have you here at Oslo Vegetarfestival for the first time.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to all of you for being here, and a double thank you if you were here yesterday as well. But I'm super happy to be speaking with you, and thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Let's go back to the beginning. What was it that made you got interested in animal rights?
So I'd gone vegan, and I went to this event in London. It was called Vegan Futures, actually, and it was similar to maybe an event like this. It had speakers, and I remember going and listening to some speakers and just thinking, yeah, I need to do something else about this. And I studied film at university, film and television production. So I had a camera, I knew how to do some basic editing. And so I decided I should do something. And I remember the first time I filmed a video, it was so bad. And I'm sitting there on my sofa and I've got my vegan t-shirt on, and my hands are all sweaty and I'm shaking and nervous. It's just me looking down the lens of a camera. I did not upload that video. That one never saw the light of day. But I do still think it's funny. The thing I always feel most nervous about when it comes to the things that I do is the filming of videos. I don't know why, it's just so strange. It feels so unnatural. Like, even though this should make me feel more nervous, I feel far less nervous doing something like this than if it's just me alone in a room with a camera. Even though there's nothing that could really go wrong there. I'm not going to make a fool of myself, apart from to myself. But that is so hard. So yeah, that was sort of the inspiration, really. I went to this event, started to feel quite passionate. I realized that I wanted to do something about it, and YouTube and filming content just seemed like the first step that was most suitable for me.
So, what was it like about animals? Because you haven't been a vegan your whole life. You haven't been an animal rights activist your whole life. What was it that made you kind of think, animals, I need to speak up for them?
We were just speaking backstage about individuality of animals, and that was something that really became very prominent and powerful for me. Yesterday in my talk I spoke about Rupert the hamster. So essentially, when I grew up, I didn't have any dogs or cats, rabbits, gerbils, hamsters, no animals in my life. And then when I was 18, I got my first little companion animal, this tiny hamster called Rupert. And I just thought he was the most wonderful little creature. He was so sweet, so gentle. But he was also very fussy. You know, he loved broccoli, he didn't like kale. He was also very lazy. I remember when I got Rupert, I bought him a wheel for his cage, his home. And he was meant to run in his wheel because hamsters run in their wheels. And I saw Rupert use his wheel about 3 times in 3 years. He was so lazy. And I remember I bought him a ball to run around the apartment, like a see-through ball. And I thought that he would use that instead. And every time I put him in his ball, he would take the food from his cheeks, eat it, and just go straight to sleep. How did he live for so long with such poor fitness regimes? I don't know. All the broccoli, I guess. And I remember at the time, I watched this documentary called Earthlings. You know, a very unpleasant film, very graphic, but very powerful. And one of the ideas in the documentary that it sort of that it speaks about is the idea of speciesism. You know, how we view animals, how we discriminate against animals based on their species. You know, we gas pigs because they're not dogs. You know, they're pigs. We treat animals very differently, not because they are fundamentally different, not in the ways that matter, but just because of the way that we view them and perceive them. And this idea of an individual became very powerful to me because I was looking at Rupert and I was thinking about him being an individual. So he had likes, he had a personality, he was lazy. These things made him who he was. And I could have got a different hamster and I could have called that hamster Rupert, but that Rupert might have loved running in his wheel, might have loved kale and not really cared for broccoli. But the Rupert that I had was specific in the ways that he was specific. And it just suddenly occurred to me, and I was vegetarian at that point, but even so, it suddenly occurred to me that when we talk about what happens to animals, sometimes we get lost in the numbers. We say, well, we kill 85 billion land animals and we kill 1 and 2 trillion fish every single year. And those numbers are obviously horrific and so huge, but that they're so big that it's almost impossible to connect with them. You know, you say to someone, we kill 2 trillion fish, and it's kind of hard to even imagine what that looks like, let alone have an emotional connection to that. But if you were to show someone a video of a fish suffering, struggling, out of water, flapping, all of a sudden that becomes a lot easier to feel something towards, to see, to empathize with. And I think that idea of animals as individuals is very powerful for us as advocates of veganism, but for anyone who isn't vegan, thinking about animals in those ways, not just thinking about pigs, cows, chickens, but thinking about a pig, a cow, a chicken. What is their experience like as an individual in that farm, in that slaughterhouse? What feelings are they experiencing? How is that fear for them as an individual? I think that's very powerful. And Rupert, the hamster, helped me connect with that idea of viewing animals not as objects, not as numbers, but as conscious feeling beings, individuals. And if a little animal who could sit in the palm of my hand meant so much to me, and most importantly, had so much value within himself, for himself as an individual, then what does that say about every other animal on this planet? And that was a big thing for me.
So in Norway we kill around 18 million land animals or individuals a year. But what do you think is wrong about how the animals are treated in the animal industry?
Well, it's an interesting question because there is a couple of ways of approaching it. Obviously, we can say, well, it's wrong because pigs are gassed in gas chambers using carbon dioxide at rates that cause suffering. The CO2 reacts with the moisture in their throats and their eyes to form carbonic acid, which creates a burning sensation. There's the fear, the anxiety, the confusion, the terror in these cages that are lowered into these pits of death. We can talk about chickens who are raised for meat. They're bred to reach slaughter weight in just 5-6 weeks' time. So they go from babies to massive overweight chickens in only a matter of weeks, which causes organ failure, causes them to collapse under their own weight so they can't reach food and water points. They're trapped in barns where there's just feces and urine, which creates ammonia buildup, which burns the feathers off their skin, creates breathing problems, can even cause blindness. We can talk about dairy cows and how they're forcibly impregnated, how weird, creepy, disgusting, disturbing that is. There's this idea that when we buy cow's milk and dairy products, are paying for someone to take semen from a bull, to then inject that semen into a cow, to impregnate a cow, to take their baby away from them so that we can drink their milk instead. I mean, what are we doing? Seriously, this is the thing that sometimes confuses me. You know, when you just think about what we're paying for these things to happen. People are doing these things because we are asking them to through the purchases that we make. I mean, it's just so outrageous and absurd. And when I think about dairy in many ways in particular, I just think, how have we ended up in this situation where babies are taken from their mothers so that we can drink their mother's milk? So we wean off our own mothers and then wean onto someone else's mother, but that someone else's mother is of an entirely different species. Like, and people think vegans are weird, you know, it boggles the mind. But to answer the question slightly differently, we can talk about all the terrible things that happen, and there are many, and they are terrible. But even if you were to take away some of these things, take away the gas chambers, take away the rate of growth that broiler chickens are forced to endure, the fundamental crux of the problem is that we are taking animals and exploiting them for our selfish gain. The practices make it worse, but the practices are a symptom. The problem is, as a species, we have a mindset which views these animals as being so undeserving of moral worth that all of these things become viewed as acceptable as a consequence. But the issue is not specifically these things, it's the mindset that we have. And even if we got rid of gas chambers and some of these very, very terrible practices, the worst practices, it's true, but even if we got rid of them, the fundamental problem still remains. We're still viewing these animals as being objects, commodities, producers. We don't view them as sentient animals, feeling beings deserving of their own autonomy, the right to their own bodies and their own lives. And so, of course, I really want these practices to be abolished, but more than that, I want the system to be abolished, because there's not a right way of doing the wrong thing. And exploiting and subjugating and harming, and of course, ultimately killing, is the wrong thing regardless of how we do it. So yes, the practices are terrible, but fundamentally, we don't just need to change the practices, we need to abolish the whole system as it exists.
So, so who is responsible for the system being like this and kind of has the power to change it?
Well, I always do feel a bit guilty because as a vegan, and I'm sure all of you who speak about veganism do the same, we try and encourage other people to go vegan. And in a way, I feel a little bit bad for that because it's not our fault, vegan or not. When did we vote for this? When did we sign petitions asking for intensive farming? We never asked for these things. We never demanded that pigs be forced into gas chambers. This was never our choice. It was chosen for us by the industry, by their lobbyists, and by our policymakers, people who are often either tied in with the farming sector or have connections within it, sometimes have even worked within it before they became public officers. So it's really frustrating that the burden of responsibility is placed on our shoulders to bring about change for a system that we never asked for. And fundamentally, we don't have as much power to change as those in these other positions do. But sadly, these people aren't going to change. You know, the pig industry isn't going to wake up one day with a moral conscience. The chicken industry isn't going to wake up one day with empathy for chickens. And our policymakers and legislators are not going to change things that they think will disrupt the social cohesion. And the problem is, because vegans are a minority, we're not going to see the sweeping policy changes that maybe we would like right now. We have to change the attitudes of society and of voters and of everyday people, and then we might start to see change on a bigger scale, politically speaking. So it's, even though I think in the rung of responsibility, the ladder of responsibility, we are somewhere near the bottom of that responsibility, sadly, it's on us to do something about it. Because those who've created this, who condone it, who profit from it, who are the ones most in control of it, are the ones least likely to do anything about it. So it is technically on us to do something. And of course, the way we can do that is by being vegan, living vegan, hopefully encouraging others to become vegan in whichever way that we can. And then hopefully slowly in time, through this change in ourselves and in the people around us, we can start to bring about broader, larger changes. But it's a process, it takes time. And I do think it's fundamentally unfair that the people who we should rely on to actually guide us towards a more ethical and sustainable and healthy society are fundamentally failing us. But then there's not necessarily many surprises in that, sadly.
Yeah, because I think it's very difficult to stop eating meat when the whole system is rigged that you should eat meat. Like in Norway, over 80% of the money going to subsidize the farmers go to meat industries, so it's more profitable to make meat products. And also in the shops, the shops cut the price on meat to get the people in, and then they rise the price on vegetables to kind of earn money. So like everywhere, it's just like really hard to do something about it, and that means the meat is cheap and vegetables are expensive, which makes it hard for a lot of people. But I know you were just in Sverige, in Sweden, in Skavlan, And you spoke to the Minister of Agriculture there in a debate. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's very good. It's on YouTube. But when meeting a person with that much power, who can actually make changes, who can make changes to where the money goes, for example, how do you prepare for a conversation like that?
Well, the first thing I do is panic and think, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I just, what I did with that debate was I spent time researching everyone who I was debating against. So there was someone from a zoo, there was a chef, there was the Minister for Agriculture, and I try and just understand what their basic positions are. And the Minister for Agriculture was quite straightforward, because most of his basic positions were fundamentally ones that I disagreed with, not just in the case of veganism. But I wanted to see what he'd said before, what were his previous comments about plant-based eating, and what was he looking to do as Minister of Agriculture. And I must admit, I don't normally get put in a situation where I can debate, someone in the UK. That would never happen, I don't think. But most of the time, the shows I get invited to appear on in the UK sometimes they're just, the people are there, I don't know, to be a joke, I'm not sure. But with that person, it was interesting to me, and in a strange way, I think I just knew that there was an opportunity to not change their mind. This person is entrenched within their viewpoints. They're part of a political party, and unfortunately that doesn't allow much freedom of expression. They have to somewhat support the party line. That party line is not very favorable towards veganism. And so I didn't think I would change his mind. I didn't think that I would change his position. But that also gives me a little bit of leverage, because I know that I can put them in a bit of a corner where I can make them feel like they can't answer a question properly. The real focus of that conversation was actually on the gassing of pigs. It came up because I sort of raised it as a point of contention, and the minister was invited to speak about it. And so then I just tried to ask him what he thought about it. And it puts him in a very difficult situation, because on the one hand, he's a close ally of the farming community in Sweden. He's a hunter himself. He's very much involved within that community. And he's not going to say on television, I think it's wrong, because as the Minister for Agriculture, that puts him in a very tricky situation where he's alienating a lot of his supporters generally from rural and farming communities. So he's not going to want to say that, because he probably doesn't necessarily believe that it's wrong. But he also doesn't want to say that it's okay, because to say that forcing animals into gas chambers is okay is a really, really horrible situation. It's just a terrible thing to say. And he knows that he's going to alienate a lot of people watching and listening, because who would say such a thing? And so he's in a really difficult situation where he can't say, or he could, but he doesn't want to say yes or no. And I kind of knew that, so I could sort of pull him up on that. His refusal to sort of take a stance allowed me to say, well, essentially, this is why people don't trust politicians. You can't answer simple questions. You refuse to do so. And what was really interesting is afterwards, after the recording had finished, and I was leaving the building, there were a couple of people outside, and they came up to me and started chatting with me. And they weren't vegan, but they said, I really liked how you spoke. You kind of pushed back against the politician. And I think there was a lot of people in the audience who weren't vegan, but they enjoyed seeing some of that kind of squirming. And I felt a little bit guilty, because I think in a way I hadn't necessarily acted in a way that was sort of usual in terms of the etiquette and politeness that maybe people in these shows are more used to. But it allowed me just to kind of push back a little bit. Which I enjoy. And actually, on the gas chambers thing, I did a thing in the UK, a debate with a turkey farmer, and it was quite a similar situation, where in the UK, turkeys, and probably here as well, are also killed in gas chambers. And he said on television, this farmer, that the way that we kill animals is compassionate. And so I said to him, okay, gas chambers are compassionate. Can you please say that out loud? And he laughed uncomfortably. And I said, you've said that what we do to animals is compassionate. Please just say out loud, gas chambers are compassionate. But you can't say that. Like, who would say that? Not even the turkey farmer would say that. he will say, well, we kill animals in a compassionate way, but he'll never actually say it in that way of saying gas chambers are compassionate, because of course they're not. And I do think there's power sometimes in just stating things very simply for people, because the whole industry hides behind labels and marketing terms and euphemisms, and we say humane slaughter and compassionate and ethical, but they do this in a way that doesn't line up what they're saying with the truth and the reality. And when you have to sort of confront those two polar opposites, what the industry says versus what the industry does, all of a sudden it's clearly jarring, because the idea that gas chambers are compassionate, it feels wrong, and of course it is wrong. And I think that there's power in that, and I kind of knew going into that debate that I had a little bit of a space to maybe prod and push just a little bit. But truth be told, I didn't know what I was going to be asked. I didn't know what was going to come up. And so I just kind of hopefully went with the flow of the conversation. But what I did know is that on the table, he was the person I most wanted to spar with, most wanted to have a back and forth with, because of who he was, because of the power he has, and because of his position in that dynamic. And hopefully to viewers, it was good.
It was very good. I thought you were very calm, and I was really impressed about how calm and compassionate you were towards him in that interview. But what did he say anything to you after you left the show? Or?
No. So afterwards, yeah, it was Skavlan and myself, and then the politician Peter Kulgrim came over, and he was basically saying bye. And I felt a bit bad, because I think I came across a bit patronizing, which I didn't mean to, but I said, it was really fun. I know that maybe you weren't expecting, you didn't know who I was, so maybe you weren't sure of what I would say, but just wanted to say, thank you for chatting, or something like that. And I think I came across a bit patronizing, even though I didn't mean to. So I didn't speak with him. But the chef guy was there, so I spoke with the chef, who is a very popular chef in Sweden. And I was speaking with him a little bit backstage. And we were talking about the vegan options he had at his burger place, and he sort of said, I'm all in favor of veganism. One of those people who, and I support vegans. So we had a little discussion about that. And then I spoke with Skavlan quite a bit, and he was very friendly. I liked him. He was nice to me. Not that means he's a nice person, he might not be, but he was nice to me at least. And he said, I think it's really important. Hopefully we can talk about it more. And I was like, well, you have my email, but I'm not sure if I'll hear from him again. But it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. And what I will say is that compared to experiences I've had in the UK, wow, it was so nice. The production team was so friendly. Normally in the UK, I get there and I realize that I've kind of been set up a little bit. I got to one show, and before I went on, there's a TV showing what's happening live, and the presenter is saying, veganism is an eating disorder, it's this and that, and I was like, oh, okay. So that wasn't what I was expecting before I got here. So it was really refreshing to just be invited to a show and to be allowed to speak. Because normally I get there and I have 8 minutes and there's 3 other non-vegans, and we're all kind of trying to talk over one another because they just want it to be, I don't know, entertaining first and interesting second. But this was different. I felt like I could speak and actually go into different conversations and push back and have those back and forths. And that was quite rare. So yeah, I appreciated that.
You've also talked to a lot of other people, not just politicians and people in power. And we did invite our guests at Oslo Vegetarfestival to send in their questions for you, since this is a Q&A. And one of the most common questions were how to talk to people you care about veganism and animal rights, or eating less meat. Because it can be a bit hard if it's your family or your colleagues. What have you kind of learned over all these years that you've spoken to so many different people?
Well, the thing I've learned is that the hardest people to speak to are friends and family, by far. I mean, it doesn't even come close. They are by far the hardest people to speak to, because there's so much emotion there. You've got history, you've got love. There are so many things that can make honest conversations that are challenging and are, of course, about morals and ethics, very, very hard. And you don't want to upset anyone, but you don't want to be silent. You want to say something, but how do you navigate that? And I don't think there's a simple rule. I think it really depends on what your family are like, what your friends are like. You know, my family aren't vegan, and in the time that I've been vegan, my brother went vegetarian and then stopped being vegetarian. So I think I've failed in that regard so far. But I do think it's somewhat similar to how we would engage with anyone. You know, we've got to be kind, polite, respectful. And I think with family, and let's say parents in particular, I try to rationalize why for example, when I first went vegan, I'd been vegan for about 6 months. I told my mum, didn't tell her the reasons why, but about 6 months in, I decided to send her an email, which is so cold, isn't it? Like, I could have phoned her. I sent her an email, like I'm, oh gosh. You know, hi mum, you know, I've been vegan for about 6 months. I just wanted to explain why. And so I put a little paragraph about ethics, environment, health, and I attached this video. And this video, it was a video by Dr. Melanie Joy. And it's an incredibly relaxed, friendly, understanding video. You know, Dr. Melanie Joy, if you know her, she's very, very friendly, she's very calm, she's the opposite of like an angry, antagonistic person, right? And I thought this will be perfect, this will work. I'll send one email and I'll have a vegan family by the end of the day. You know, 11 years later, I'm still waiting. Anyway, I got a reply via email. Yeah. Hi Edward. At least it wasn't dear son. That would be much worse, you know. Hi Edward is fine. And then she sort of laid out the reasons why I was wrong. And one of them was that she was worried that I was going to die from synthetic protein, which I didn't, at the time, I didn't really know what she meant by synthetic protein. I was eating tofu and chickpeas, but I still do. But it really upset me. But actually, when I thought about it, I understood more. And I kind of, I viewed it not as being a cruel thing or a horrible thing or her trying to upset me, but it actually makes a lot of sense. You know, my mum loves me. She wants me to be healthy. Hopefully she wants me to be, you know, thriving. And in a way, it's kind of nice, I suppose, that her main priority was, I'm worried about your health, and I want you to be healthy. And of course, there's so much misinformation about plant-based diets and health that I wasn't surprised, actually, that she said that. Yeah, it was a bit funny, it didn't make sense, was upsetting at the time. But when I reflected on it, I understood it, and actually was quite reassuring because it said something which I thought was nice. And I think that's the thing about parents. They raise us, hopefully, to be good people. So in their minds, at least in the minds of my parents, I know that they were trying to give me good morals, good values, hopefully a good outlook on life. And if I get to being 20 years old, as I was at that age, 20, 21, and I email and tell her that the way she's raised me essentially is wrong, because that's what I'm saying, you know, you've raised me in a way that's wrong and unethical. I'm not only criticizing her own moral code, but I'm also criticizing her parenting, you know, how she's raised me, the values she's given me. I think that's quite a hard thing for a parent, and I can understand why they might not always be thrilled when a child turns around and says, this is wrong, I've changed because I was living immorally. So I think having understanding and rationalizing those things is very important for us. But I think when we do speak, it's good to have answers prepared, you know, make sure we can respond to how we're healthy, make sure we can respond to some of the basic arguments. And I think sometimes we as vegans feel like we always have to say something. And I really fundamentally disagree with that. I think sometimes the best thing we can do is say nothing and go home and have a meal, and we eat our plant-based meal and a family their non-vegan meal, and we just enjoy that experience with them. Because what we really want to do is we want people to know that being vegan doesn't jeopardize our ability to be happy and to partake in normal society and to celebrate Christmas and to celebrate birthdays and to sit around the dinner table and have family meals where we all get on and laugh and joke. Those things are really important. And years ago, back in 2018, I did something which I now think I regret. My grandparents were having their 60th wedding anniversary, and 60 years. I think it was called a Diamond Jubilee, maybe 60 or 70 years. I mean, amazing, Like they fell in love when they were like 18, they got married, and you know, just how wonderful. And so we're having a big family gathering, and all the family, my cousins, uncles, aunts, everyone was going to be there. They'd hired this space for it, got caterers in so we could all celebrate as a family. And I went, but when it came the time for food, I didn't eat with them because I said to them it's because I didn't want to normalize the idea that eating animals was something that should be viewed as a celebrational thing. And I think in doing that, I upset them and I made veganism seem extreme and unsocial and alienating and judgmental. And I actually regret that. I think it would have been much better for me to sit with my family and eat my plant-based meal. And even though it might have been hard and uncomfortable, and it would have seemed strange to me that we were celebrating something so beautiful by eating dead animals, me being there would have meant something to them and would have shown that being vegan doesn't have to be this different thing. And I think actually the choice I made was wrong in the end. And so we're not always going to get everything right, and we're not always going to make the best decisions or say the right things. But I do think that sometimes just being present and partaking with the normal things in our lives can be very valuable, to lead by example in that way. So don't feel like you always have to say something. But if those conversations do arise, it's good to have some responses, good to have some answers. And the thing I always like to do is ask lots of questions. Rather than sitting at the dinner table and telling someone how they should think or how they should feel, I like to ask questions because it invites people to reflect on their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own morals and values. You know, as vegans, we're not trying to convince someone of what we believe. We're trying to show them that what they already believe probably already lines up with the ethics of veganism. Because by and large, everyone is against animal suffering and animal cruelty. And as soon as we establish that, we can recognize at some point that what we do to animals to eat them and consume their secretions is an act of animal suffering and animal cruelty. So I think we can gently lead people in that direction. But be patient, be kind to yourself, and I think just slowly, hopefully over time, maybe we can get through to friends and family. I don't know. I'm not there yet, but we'll see.
So I think like for strategies, I mean, I'm sure everyone who's here can say, yeah, they want animals to be treated well. They don't want them to experience suffering, and yeah, they care about animals. But what do you think is the best strategy, or what's the best thing as an animal, someone who cares about animals, to spend their time doing to make animals' lives better?
I don't think there's one thing. I think that the important thing is that we do what is best for us. And so what I mean by that is we're all individuals, just like I spoke earlier about Rupert and animals. Well, of course, we're very much the same. We are all individuals with personalities, likes and dislikes, but also skills and capabilities. And we can't all do the same thing. We shouldn't all do the same thing. I think what is really important is that we all do something that is right for us. And I think if we want to best help animals, as well as being vegan, we should also tap into our other passions, our other things that we enjoy. And so if you enjoy making food, then make delicious plant-based food for people. If you're a creative, you make music, or you do graphic design, or you're a filmmaker, or a poet, a writer, whatever it is that you enjoy doing within your spare time, as a hobby, professionally, can you incorporate that into this care for animals? And can you use your care for animals as an extension of these other things in your life that you enjoy? I don't ever think that we should feel like there's one way of doing something, there's one way of advocating, there's one way of making change. I think that the power that we have is that we have multiple voices from different backgrounds, different demographics, different cultures, with different experiences. And the really powerful thing is we might share something in common, care for animals, a desire for a vegan future. But the way that we've reached this point of view is unique to the experiences that we've had in our life. And what that means is that we all have our own stories to tell. I have my story about Rupert and Earthlings and the other things that I spoke about in yesterday's talk for those of you who were here. But you all have those moments in your life, the things that inspired you to change, those points in your life which changed how you viewed something, how you felt about something. And those are unique to you. And so the way that you communicate those, the way that you express those, is also something only you can do uniquely. So don't think that there's only one way, or you have to do it this way, or this is the best way. I think what we need is variety, and that's how we can get through to the most amount of people. So just think about what you can do, what can you bring? And it might be something small and simple, or something whatever. It doesn't matter, because each and everything is valuable and important. And I think that's what I always try to encourage people to recognize.
Thank you. One of the question that most people ask is how to kind of keep your spirit going, like, you know, for year after year after year, and the changes are so small in a way, even though it's going the right way mostly, but you know, yeah, we can debate that. But yeah, how do you kind of keep the inspiration going for year after year?
Well, I think the first thing is we shouldn't punish ourselves if we feel sad or down or upset, or if we cry, or if we feel low. I don't think we should ever punish, never punish yourself for that, because it makes so much sense. It's okay to feel those things. In fact, it's normal to feel angry, disappointed, frustrated. It's normal. It's the most normal response that you could have to what's going on, because it doesn't make sense. It's terrible. It's confusing. And the thing is, it's not this horrible thing that's only happening because of bad people. It's mostly happening because of kind and loving people who are paying for these things. And in a way that makes it worse for us to rationalize, because it's really straightforward if someone does something bad and they're an evil person, because you can say, well, they're an evil person. It's still really terrible, but it doesn't change how I think about the world more generally because of this evil person. But when we're talking about this system, we're talking about the people who we love the most being responsible for it. So no wonder we feel really sad, because we're not just trying to change the hearts and minds of a few people, but the majority of people. And those people don't make sense because we know that they're compassionate and kind people generally. But in this regard, they have this huge blind spot where they're paying for these things to happen. And so it's totally normal and rational to feel that way. And we shouldn't suppress it. We need to find ways of coping and dealing with it, but we shouldn't feel shame for feeling that way. And the way that I feel, it to be honest, it's like a yo-yo. It's all over the place. It's just up and down. And you know, some days I'll get out of bed and I'll feel so positive. Like this morning, you know, I'm in beautiful Oslo. The weather's amazing. I had such a nice time yesterday. I've got this to look forward to. I'm going to be around lots of vegans. And I'm thinking, this is fantastic. I'm going to have a wonderful day. I go have a delicious coffee, have a nice breakfast. Everything's great. I feel like the future is going to be fantastic. But in a week, 2 weeks, I'll wake up and I'll be like, this is terrible. We're farming more animals than ever, intensively farming animals in these terrible ways. People aren't changing. I can't even change my own mother. How am I going to change other people? And you start to feel heavy, and you feel like nothing's going to change. And so it's okay to have that broad spectrum of emotion and feeling. But I think we have to try and find some sense of positivity. And what I've really found valuable in recent years is thinking about change not in this sort of big way. I don't want to view change simply through the lens of this or a vegan world, and I'll feel happy if we have a vegan world, because that change is probably not going to be in my lifetime. And ultimately, if I view change just through this very large lens, I miss out on all the small positive things that are happening. And what's great is there are all of these small positive things happening all the time. Norway, for example, is going to ban the fast-growing breeds of chickens, or the most fast-growing breeds of chickens, by the end of 2027. Look, does that change everything that we want? No. But is that going to reduce a lot of suffering for a lot of animals? Yes. And we should feel positive about that. We shouldn't deny ourselves the ability to feel happy just because it doesn't represent the fullest change that we want. Likewise, let's say that you go into work, or you do go home for a meal with your family, and your mum tries an oat milk coffee, or your work colleagues try the plant-based cakes that you've made the day that you go in. and they like them. And they say that they taste nice, and, oh, I didn't know that vegan cakes could taste like this, or I didn't know that an oat milk coffee was this delicious. Is that a massive change in the world? No. But is it a change that's powerful? Absolutely. So I think we should celebrate all of these small things because overall they lead to something bigger. And we shouldn't feel guilty for feeling positive about things just because all of these terrible things are still happening. So reduce your barrier to feeling positive. Make it so you can feel these sustainable achievements throughout your life and indeed the things that are happening around the world. But also don't feel shame for feeling low. For me, activism and advocacy has been very helpful because it's allowed me to have an outlet for those emotions. And it's allowed me to have an outlet for some of those feelings. And what I've felt strongly, and it seems somewhat strange, but the more that I've spoken to people, the more positive I've felt. You know, I've spoken to hunters, to farmers, to not very nice politicians. I've spoken to other people's mothers and fathers. I've spoken to lots and lots of people. And what I've realized in this time is that actually the majority of people do agree with veganism. And when given the space to reflect and to contemplate and to more deeply understand, they do actually begin to connect with it. It's not us against a whole world of people who don't care. It's not us versus them. It's just us against a world where there is a prescribed ignorance. And what I mean by that is people are born into a system where ignorance is forced upon them. It's not a deliberate choice because they're cruel or don't care. It's because they've been raised in these systems that prescribes ignorance. It gives it to them so that they don't think, they don't have a conscious reflection. But when they're given that space to think more deeply, to connect more profoundly with what we do to animals, actually, it could be a farmer, a hunter in Texas. It could be a politician. Who knows? Maybe. But these people, when given the space, often do find themselves agreeing with veganism, perhaps more than they thought that they would. And I find that to be something to hold on to. It's not a world of people who don't care. It's a world of people who've maybe not had the chance yet to think more deeply for themselves about why they should care.
So do you think change needs to come from like kind of the bottom, like all the people, all of us, or that it has to come from the top, like through, for example, politicians deciding that something is not allowed anymore?
Well, it should come from the top, but it won't. And I think it has to come from the bottom to begin with. You know, we're not going to change everyone, but we can change enough people so that things do start to change from a legal perspective. And, you know, one of the reasons why I do like welfare reforms is not because I think in and of themselves they're enough, but what I do think is that they are reflective of the broader attitudes of society that wants to keep shifting the dial towards a more ethical system of farming. And many people might not think that equals veganism yet, but I think it does show that actually, generally speaking and socially speaking, there is a lot of care for these issues. So the only way that we'll change policies is if people within society want that change. And the best way we can signal that we want that change is first by changing how we live, and then secondly, maybe getting involved in some grassroots movements, whether it's event organizing, whether it's doing screenings if you're at a university, whether it's doing things in work, like bringing in plant-based food. Whatever we can do to just start to spread the message within our local groups, within our citywide groups, all of these things start to create bigger change. But I think it will ultimately rest on us to begin with, and then hopefully we'll get some sensible politicians.
Thank you so much for everything you do, and thank you for all the good advice to us, Ed Winters.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you so much. Thank you.